I was military for 33 years. I had 6.5 years active duty, and then the rest of the 33 years in the National Guard, because I was flying full-time for U.S. Airways, what is now American Airlines. So I had two parallel careers, and I worked 7 days a week for many years. But during that time, on 9/11, I was flying a Boeing 737, and I had an overnight in Portland, Maine. You probably don't remember this. The terrorists that flew into the Twin Towers came across the border from Canada into Portland, Maine. They spent that night in Portland, Maine, the same night I was in Portland, Maine. And the next morning, they flew to Boston and flew the aircraft and into the Twin Towers on what was 9/11. I got up the next morning, turned the news on TV, and saw the second airplane hit the Twin Towers. The point being, 9/11 affected me deeply for many reasons. But during my military career, I never was able to go to the Mideast. I was only in Kuwait once for a short time. And I felt like I needed to do more than that because of the harm that the terrorists had done to the United States. So I took a job when I was 68 years old, 4 years ago, as a contractor for the U.S. Army. And I went to Afghanistan and flew Army surveillance aircraft. And that was my way of doing what I could do to help the coalition forces in the fight against terrorism. So it sort of was like an uncompleted part of my life. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it. I grew up in rural East Tennessee in the mountains in a little town called Pikeville, Tennessee. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. We were very poor growing up. And I was determined not to be poor the rest of my life. So I was able to go to college, and by working and work during the summer and save money and scrape through. It took me 5 years, but I finally graduated with an undergraduate degree in English journalism. But the most important thing that I did for my life was go into the military. So I was in the ROTC program at my school, Tennessee Tech, for 4 years. It's the most important thing that I ever did, because I was a raw young kid out of the mountains in East Tennessee. I was a very poor student. I had poor concentration, and I'd never done well at anything. And the military taught me self-discipline. They taught me self-discipline and values. And basically, your basic values come from your family, and for me, that was my mother. So I knew right from wrong, and I knew to be good to people. But all the other parts, the discipline and looking ahead at a career and being excited about what you could achieve, came from the military, and that was the best thing I ever did. And I got my commission as a second lieutenant in the Army when I graduated, and I thought I would stay in the Army 2 years and be finished. Well, 33 years later, I retired. I have severe hearing loss in both ears. I had hearing loss already from many years of high noise exposure, both in my military career and in the airline. And I was on the weapons range prior to going to Afghanistan, and I had faulty earplugs. And so my hearing loss went from 20% each year to 40% hearing loss in each year. And I think it's worse than that now. So it's permanent. There's no way that I'll ever get that back. But all I can say is protect your hearing. And a lot of people are going to have hearing loss because of loud music. Airplane noise is one kind of noise, but exposure to loud music over a long time will give you permanent hearing damage. So people just need to be aware of this, because you don't want to be in the position I'm in and have this kind of hearing loss and know that it's irreversible. That's a bad feeling, and it affects your life a lot. people back home in the United States ask me, how did you wind up in Colombia? Well, I didn't just wake up one morning and decide to move to Cartagena, because I'm very methodical because of my military background and my airline background. So I researched places to move for 10 years before I retired. And Cartagena is a beautiful city. There's a little over 1 million people here. And it's full of beautiful Spanish colonial architecture. The El Centro Wall City Historic District is absolutely beautiful. And you can be entertained just by walking around the streets. There are street vendors everywhere. There's all kinds of shops. There are many wonderful restaurants. Cartagena has many 5-star restaurants, and the cost is about half what it is in Charlotte, where I'm from. Charlotte's a beautiful city, by the way, Charlotte, North Carolina. I lived there 43 years, but it's expensive, like a lot of cities in the U.S., and the cost of living here in Cartagena is 50% what it is back in Charlotte. And also, I don't own a car here, so that's a biggie. You don't need a car. There's little taxis run all over the city. And I can take a taxi from here at my apartment to El Centro for $3. It's about $5 to go to the airport. So you don't really need a car. The weather is tropical. We're right on the Caribbean Sea, and I'm right on the ocean, so I get to enjoy expansive views of the ocean from my apartment. There's excellent restaurants, and there's just tons of history and beautiful architecture. So, and wonderful people. The Colombian people are very warm and welcoming and friendly. I was in Cartagena for about 6 or 7 days when the quarantine went into effect in Colombia. And I've been watching the coronavirus, and I thought, well, it's not going to be that bad, this will be over with in a few days, everything will be okay. Well, it wasn't okay. And Colombia imposed a very strict quarantine. So I'm in Cartagena, and I'm basically locked in live in a very, very beautiful apartment here in Boca Grande. The bad part was I was basically under house arrest. I was imprisoned in my apartment. You could not, and this lasted for 5 months. You could not go outside except on the days, and they call it Pico de Cédula. And that's Pico de Cédula has to do with the last number on your cedula, your national ID card, which I did not have. So I had to use the last number on my passport. And that number determined what day you could go outside the building. Well, you could only go to the grocery store once every 7 days. That was it. If you went to the grocery store, they wouldn't let you in. The doors were blocked. That was it. And then it became once every 10 days. So you had to go to the grocery store and get enough groceries to last for 10 days. Now keep in mind, I speak almost no Spanish. And I remember the first time I went to an ATM machine, and I used Wells Fargo, which is an American bank, and I'm going like, I hope I can figure this out, because I had no idea, because without money, which I could convert, which I could take the money out of the ATM in pesos, I had no way to pay for things. And so I'm looking at this ATM machine, and I felt a little sense of panic for a few seconds. I went like, I got to figure this out. And I calmed down, everything was okay. I got the ATM machine to work. I got Colombian pesos so I could pay for things. Most restaurants in Cartagena will take your U.S. bank card. The great majority will. But I didn't know, it didn't make any difference. They were unfortunately all closed. So for the next 5 months, I was basically under house arrest. Now, for lack of a better term, that was it. I couldn't leave my apartment except on the day that I had Pico de Cédula at all. Once per week, you could not go outside your apartment. And I'm here in Cartagena. I don't know one person. There's a little over 1 million people in Cartagena. I didn't know one person except Camila Palayes, who is the head of the expats in Cartagena, who I'd become friends with, and she was extremely helpful to me because I could send her WhatsApps and ask her questions on how to do things, and she was very helpful. That was it. I didn't know anybody else in Cartagena. So then I started following the news very carefully because I was a little bit worried about what would happen. And the embassy in Bogota, the U.S. embassy, sent out messages and said all Americans in Colombia need to return to the U.S. And about that time, all the commercial flights stopped. They all stopped. There were no flights. There was no way to leave, except there were some evacuation flights planned. And this was about 3 or 4 weeks after the quarantine started. And I thought about it, and I thought, maybe I need to go back to the U.S. because this could last. I mean, it may get to the point I can't leave. And basically, I'm just stuck. I don't know when I'll be able to. Maybe it'll be a year or two before I can leave. I don't really know. But I thought about it, and I thought, I don't really have any real reason to go back to the U.S. I moved here because of my girlfriend, and I want to study Spanish, and I like it here. So I'm just going to ride out the coronavirus right here in Cartagena. So I did, and it was difficult. For exercise, the gymnasiums were all closed. I live on the 22nd floor. So every day, 7 days a week, I walk from the 22nd floor to the lobby and back up. Once every day, 7 days a week for exercise. And my landlady had left a tiny little pair of dumbbells about this big in the apartment. They weighed like 3.5 pounds each. So I'd go out on my deck in the afternoon, and I'd take both of them in one hand, and I would do bicep curls and push-ups and sit-ups to keep myself in shape because, I needed the exercise for my mind as much as I did for my body, especially at a time like this, which is pretty stressful.